Thanks, Sarah, and good morning and welcome, everybody. So, as Sarah said, today's event is on ICS telecom, and that's actually what I use, but it's equally applicable for the functions that I use to HDZ warfare. There will be, for those HDZ warfare users, obviously some slightly more specific functions that are included in the new release, and the news and modifications file will be the place to look for that. And generally, because I'm not going to cover all of the changes here, I'm just going to give a little flavour of the changes, and I've just picked out a few that I hope might be of interest to people. Okay, so what am I going to cover this morning? So firstly, I'll cover some sort of general features. So these are bits that are really applicable, probably to most people across the different types of really technologies and scenarios that you might be using the planning tool for. I'll then move on to look at some workflows. So we've got some workflows that have been introduced to allow you to, let's say, do a bit of semi-automation of planning activities. And it's quite a nice little feature there. So I'll introduce that feature. I've got a little section on propagation models, again, probably quite generally applicable. So there's been a number of new models that have been added. Some of these are just updates for the latest version of the IT recommendations, but I'll signpost most of the kind of main and important ones there. And then I'm just going to, the last part, I'm just going to kind of focus on kind of 4 little areas of technologies, let's say, in terms of planning types. So I've got some point and multi-point features that I'll introduce, also some changes with the point-to-point functionality, a little bit on broadcast, and then just finally on mesh networks. So hopefully between those there should be something for everybody. Okay, so first of all, in the kind of general section, so in terms of mapping, and I'll demonstrate a couple of these features actually in the tool, so you can see where these are. We've got what's called a map quad function that's been added. So this is to do with the kind of Bing Maps functionality. So traditionally, you stream the data. So when you go to an area at specific zoom level, that data is streamed, and then it kind of builds up into a local cache. What this function allows you to do is actually to kind of batch download and then store it locally. So rather than just as you go building up, allows you to actually, for an area at defined zoom levels, actually to create that. And that's particularly useful if you're perhaps multiple of you are sharing data and you download it to a cache that's on the server, and you can all access that. Obviously, then the time that it will take to actually draw in the maps is virtually instantaneous when it's using from a cache, as opposed to kind of streaming the data from the servers. And I'll just show you where that function is within the tools. The clutter builder, we've got some more attributes there. If those that have used it, there's quite a lot you can do now, actually, from whether it's from OpenStreetMaps or some of the shapefile data. So this allows you, particularly if you're going into new areas, looking at planning activities, to actually build up some clutter layers for yourself. And there's a new algorithm that will allow you, if you've got things like buildings data, to look at what types of clutter based on heights of the building. The reason why that's useful is often you may have some buildings data, but if you don't have any associated clutter data with that, then for some of the functions within the tool, you actually need clutter layers to be able to run those. So it allows you to kind of automatically build that. And so there's quite a few extra attributes generally around the clutter builder. From the station database, now we've added the ability to look at the Google Earth export. On this is a site-by-site basis, and generally across the equally from the map and the station database, and the resolution of the output has been improved. And I'll show you where that's located as well. The maximum number of objects. This is the stations. that are associated on the screen. That's been increased to 20,000 or 10,000 microwave links if you're using point-to-point. So again, that limit changed originally when we moved to the 64-bit versions, but again, it's been doubled in terms of the number, so allows perhaps a bit more flexibility with some of the functions that you need to use specifically with stations on the map. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a couple of those, the map quad function and this station database Google Earth export. Okay, so here's the ICS telecom. Now, the first bit is, as I say, related to the Bing map. So this interface here, which for those that use it should be fairly familiar with, this allows you to choose the different types of map layers that you want to view on the screen here. Now, down in this bottom right hand corner, there's this map options. And there's a number of bits in there, but the one that's been added is what is called this map quad function. Okay, so if you click on that, and what this will do is it will say which levels are you gonna go between. Obviously for the area that I've got, the map area I've got defined here. So this would say between, say, level 7 and level 15. Now, just a note of caution, if you're going for lots and lots of levels, for a large area, it's going to take quite some time. So it's probably most useful to do it for the levels that you're going to have. The higher levels, the sort of 7 and above, they're relatively small number of tiles anyway. So it's perhaps the most advantageous when you're getting down to lower levels of resolution anyway. So that's where you access that function from, and then that will go away and place it into the map cache area that's within your Bing Maps license file. Just to mention, in terms of the zoom layers within the tool, so when you're looking at that, so if you see down here, we've got this L12, so that's talking about the zoom layer that we're at. So when I just showed you the levels that it was going between, so this would be for level 12. Obviously, if I start zooming in, you'll see this is level 13 and so forth. So that will be the extent of the layers that you're looking at in terms of the zoom levels down here. So that's really the one to look at. Okay, the other bit was being able to export from the station database to, this is outputs really, into Google Earth. So this is KML format essentially. So I've got a station database here, so I can simply select the number of stations that I'm interested in. So I'm just going to select a single station in this case. So you can see here it's selected that, and the option that's been added is this GE for Google Earth site by site, and you'll see here when I hover over it gives me a little explanation of it. So essentially what that would do is for each one of these stations that you select, it would export the coverage that is associated with that station, so site by site basis, into the format that you can then in Google Earth or in another GIS application for that will handle KML. Okay, I'll just kick this off and run it. I think if you're doing it for a large number, then obviously it will take a while. So I'll just say just do it for one, and then perhaps show you that output in a second. The options here you can see here for the resolution that it creates of the kind of geocoded image really. So depending on the resolution that you want, higher resolution takes slightly longer, and also there's more points associated with it, so the size of the files get bigger. So it really depends on the balance of the resolution that you want to see ultimately in the application. Okay, so what that's going to do is for each of those stations that you've selected, go through. You can see it's here, it's rendered onto the screen, just give me a little preview, and then that's going to go through and run each of those for the KMLs it's going to generate. Okay, I'll come back to that in a moment when it's finished, and just show you the output in Google Earth, just so you can see the output. Okay, so a couple of just functions that are quite widely used that have just changed position for in terms of where they're accessed. So the path profile is now accessed under the microwave menu. So for anybody that was using it, if you go to microwave, and then there's an option to path profile. So that's that traditional kind of 2D slice really between between 2 points, 2 stations, or a station and a point of interest. The import stations, subscribers, and that's also it for if you're doing an import from microwave links. So this is moved as you reverted back to the import menu. So it's probably a bit more logical in terms of the place to find that. So that allows you then to bring in, based on XY position, station or subscriber locations and associated technical details. And that's probably the most commonly used way of actually importing data into the tool. As far as filters and reporting of distance is concerned, then we've added the ability to look at vector lines, which has been there for a while to actually view them, but it actually being able to report the distance of the lines that are covered. So this could be roads, railways, vector paths that you've created, and I'll demonstrate that one within the tool. So that makes it nice and easy for actually being able to report, how many kilometers of let's say roads that you're covering, and then you can match that up if you've got a specific requirement to cover, a total distance of a network, for example. The compare station coverage has been enhanced. So this is where you're looking at 2 differences between stations, so station A and station B. Could be you're looking at perhaps a different antenna system or a change on that side that you want to really compare the differences between the 2. And there's been some enhancements to that function now. It kind of limits the extent of the area to the first station, so you're looking at the differences relative to that. So that makes it perhaps a little bit more user friendly then when you're trying to interpret the output. And there's a new interface for the C over I, and I'll show you that in a moment. Just perhaps a little bit more brief explanation of what the different types of interference method are looking to do. Essentially, the C over I calculations are the same, but it's just an interface change just to help you a little bit in terms of what's most appropriate for the type of interference situation that you're looking at. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of those, the vector line, and then just briefly show you the C over I, but I'm just going to finish off the previous one, which is that Google Earth export, because that should have finished now. So I'm just going to bring up. Okay, so here's Google Earth. So it's automatically loading here. So you can see here that this is the station. So this is the single station that I exported here, and obviously you can see then the resolution of that as I zoom in. So I chose the kind of medium resolution just for the interest of time. But obviously, if you've got the higher resolution, there's more points. You get a little bit better definition of that. So that's the site by site for the Google Earth export. Okay, so the first one was just to do with the vector line limiting. So I've got some stations here that I'll just turn on some coverage for. So this is just pre-computed coverage that I've already got here. And you can see these blue lines. Let's just bring those out again. These blue lines here just representing some vectors for the type of roads. Okay, so you can see these here. So what I'm interested in is actually the length of those lines that have been covered, and that's a new feature that's added. So redisplaying the composite coverage here, and then under the map, so under this general filter option, I've got the options here as far as vector selection. So there's a number of different options there which have been there for a while. So we have a vector line limited option, and then you'll see here we've got, these would have been here previously, the percentage of area covered and the total, but this is the new one that's been added to allow you to say, okay, what's the length of the lines, in this case the roads that's covered. As I say, it just makes it a little bit easier when you're looking at producing some statistics as to how much in terms of kilometers of a road, railway, whatever the vector line or path that you're interested in. So so that's that new function there at the bottom there.
Paul.
Yes, Sarah.
Okay, got a question come in. Can you choose what station parameters are exported to the Google KML?
In terms of the Google Earth export, there's not huge amounts you can choose. The bit really to do is to get the kind of the color palettes and things like that will be set from the export that you do. If I just bring up the dialogue and just show you, so this is based on the sort of the map I've got on the screen here. So you've really only got the ability to kind of set the palette that you're using. There's some some options here in terms of transparent legend, but the actual features that are coming across in terms of station parameters that you'll see kind of in the sort of top left-hand area once it's come in, they're not configurable in terms of the ones you want to bring onto the map. So it's only really the kind of the palette in essence that you can really do much with. So.
That's great. I hope that answers your question, Lars. Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so that was just the vector line in terms of the distance covered. The other one I just wanted to briefly show you was in terms of the C over I interface. So this is kind of generally applicable interference with a number of you may have used. There's lots of different methods here. As I say, it's just really to try and perhaps clean up and help a little bit in terms of the what it's actually doing in global interference in the interference plus best server. So there's just some notes in here now which perhaps just makes it a little bit clearer in terms of the type of interference. You get these tips down here as well as you select between them, but this perhaps just gives you a starting point in terms of which one is most appropriate and the type of interference calculation that you would be doing if you were choosing, interference on best server as opposed to global interference. So the underlying calculations that have not changed in that sense, but just a slightly refreshed interface.
Paul.
Yes.
Just a very quick one here, and I think it's something that we actually covered in a FAQ Friday recently. What's the best way to model roads using vector lines? I think that's probably something that's going to take a little while, isn't it?
Model roads as in generate, import data. What's the context there?
Alan, do you want to clarify a little? Okay, perhaps we can pick this up as we go. Perhaps if we continue, if you could give us some clarification of exactly what you mean.
Yeah, maybe we'll just take it at the end if we can maybe even open the mic up and get Alan on. So okay, we'll pick that one up at the end.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, so that was some general functions, and say which most of you will have something on there that probably you'll be using. Just wanted to spend a little bit on workflows now. So how to basically create a basic workflow and then save a workflow. So the idea really is to help kind of ensure a consistent process that you're using. It's quite easy if you've got some of these semi-repetitive tasks to do to perhaps miss out a step, or you know, not be consistent in the process you're following. And if you do make a mistake, then you know, there's some time implications for that. So the idea of this is that it will allow you just to create some basic workflows that prompt you at various stages along it to provide some input data, and then you know, calculations or whatever you're looking to do will then run automatic. So it's really a kind of a semi-automated process. Okay, so this is relying on the kind of the last commands menu. So there's a couple of different places you can do that, but if you bring up the last commands menu, depending if you've got some of these anchor points, as they're called, on, I've got them switched off, but the other way I can access that is by hitting the space bar. So this just summarizes the last menu functions that I've used. So you can see here there's a number of different functions that have been used during this session. Okay, so that's where if you're wanting to do a kind of a single one, you would go and access this, click on this, and then it would automatically bring up that dialog box for you. But we also have the ability, as I say, to do some workflows. So under the shortcuts menu at the top right hand side, we've got save workflow, and I'm gonna just load a workflow that's been pre-configured. Okay, so this is one that I've saved previously. So what you see now is that this has changed in terms of the functions that I've got here. So the ones I had previously that I briefly showed you have now been replaced by this. So what this is going to do when I run it in a second is run through each of these steps in turn, and this is going to look at actually to do with a little drive test survey and being able to bring in a station, predict a coverage, then import the drive test data, and then look at the correlation between those. So relatively simple workflow that I've saved there. So in order to run that, so having loaded that, I've got this replay last commands menu. So that's going to replay these ones here. So where it's a kind of a user-driven input, then I can just run through. You can see here, so it's selected an EWF file that I've brought onto the screen, run a coverage prediction for that site. It's then moved on to the next stage. So here we've got an ability then to select and input data. Obviously configure these up as required, you know, X and Y coordinate code, etc. And then bring the correlation at the end of it there. Okay, and at the end of it, I could then save that result if I wanted to. Okay, so it's just a way, and you have the ability, as I say, to create your own of just automating, you know, as I say, not completely, but in a way that allows you to, you know, have a series of steps that you may do, and particularly for things that you're doing repetition of and consistent things that you want to do in a specific order. So as I say, I've only got essentially 4 steps in that process, but you could add a number of other steps into the process. Okay, so that's just to briefly, that's under the shortcuts menu, and then save workflow. So that would, when you've got the workflow you want, save it, load the workflow, which is what I showed you here from one I pre-saved, and then we've got replay this last menu command. So once you've got the workflow you're interested in here, then that will basically run through and sort of play those in order.
Hi, Paul. Just a couple of very quick questions there. The first one is, how do you edit the workflows?
Okay, yeah, good question. So as you add as you go in and do a menu function, it will add to this to this here. So effectively you're starting from scratch and you can kind of add the functions. But you also have the ability, once you've got this workflow here, or these last commands, so I can actually right click on it and then I can remove a command. And you'll see here then that would remove that stage of the process. And equally I can say move up or down, so if I wanted to move this up. So it allows you then, if you've gone through and run it, but you find, okay, yeah, that order that I've started to do, it's not quite right, I can change the order, remove a step from it, add a step to it, and then get it in the position that that you want. Having done that, that's when you would save workflow and then have that for future recall.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Peter. Just one another quick one here that we've had in, Paul. Will the parameters set in each step of that process be saved in the workflow? For example, the propagation model settings.
So that's really where the parameter file would come in. So it would be similar in the sense if you were doing it automatically. So if you had those parameter files set, so things like propagation model, default antenna heights, so you could configure those up with the parameter file, and they would load that. So then it would be kind of consistent between each of them. It does obviously give you that pop-up dialog, just to, you know, a lot of cases it may be just clicking OK, or selecting a file. But if you wanted then to change, say, an antenna height or something, you could manually do it. But again, the parameter file would be the place to do that, to then pick those up as part of running that workflow.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Paul. I hope that answers your questions. Yes, it does. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, so that was workflow. So a new little feature that's been added, but hopefully that and give us some feedback as well if people are using it, finding it useful, or there's areas that they'd perhaps like to see some tweaks. But hopefully it should prove some use to a number of people. Okay, propagation models. Just going to mention a few here. So we've added so 2001. So this is -2 now. So this is kind of a general propagation model. It covers quite a big frequency span, 30 megs up to 50 gigahertz. So more recent model that's come out of the ITU, and it's trying to be a general purpose model for kind of terrestrial propagation. In terms of building entry losses and associated materials and that, then there's a couple of, there's 2040, so P2040 and 2109. So these are all to do with things like if you're applying cluster attenuations in maybe the dB per kilometer or the flat plus diffraction options. So that's how it will apply things like the building entry loss into the calculations. If you're interested, there was a recent webinar that Alex ran when he was looking at diffraction and associated properties. So there's some bits that he's covered with how they're treated within the tool in a general sense. So if you're interested in that, then have a look at the previous webinar. I think it was run earlier in the month, actually. In terms of troposcatter, that's been updated to the version 3. Microwave links, so we've got some objectives that have been added. So this is the F2113, and then there's a couple of additions really where it's just replacing the latest version of the recommendation. So 526 has gone to -14, and 530 has gone to -17. So that's one you won't see in the 530 in the sort of main propagation screen, but when you're looking at kind of microwave path budgets and things like that, then that one's applicable for that. In terms of SM1009, so this is to do with compatibility between sound broadcast and aeronautical applications. So we've had a recent project actually out in the Seychelles that we were doing, actually using that, and there's been some optimization just in terms of being able to just improve the calculation time speed. So for anybody that's using that, should see some additional benefits in terms of optimization of that. So majority of those you'll see under the propagation model screen. So just to show you that, so you can see obviously with the later versions we've got, in some cases the JOD model for compatibility still linked in there. You can see the 526-14 here, and then obviously the 2001-2 down here. So this is obviously the majority of the interface or the propagation models you would access from here. Say 530 is probably the exception in that case.
Paul.
Yes.
Just a very quick one. Is there an available list which outlines the models, the use of the models for different types of TX station parameters and typical options that are available within the model? So I think they're looking for a comprehensive list that outlines.
Yeah, there's what's used within the tools, as in the different types of reference standards here. I mean, that's available from that question mark tool. It's then really a case of, I mean, there's been some previous webinars on kind of propagation modeling, which would perhaps talk about which models are appropriate for which types of planning. So I guess between those two, this is the available ones, that effectively the ones that are in force in the tool, and then some of those either help guides or the webinars, then might point you in the right direction. Essentially, it comes down to really kind of application, frequency band. Obviously, some frequencies you're using, a recommendation may not be appropriate for that. So that's obviously something to check. And some will be, valid between certain heights, above the surface of the Earth, and therefore, if you're trying to use it above or outside the limits, then obviously the validity of that is not so. Well, you need to be careful, let's say, and perhaps select a model that's appropriate for the planning scenario you're looking at.
Okay, I hope that answers your questions, Mark. Just one other. What's the best propagation model for use for modelling FM broadcast? Again, it depends.
We've probably done some of the other, again, probably some of the webinars. You've got kind of some of the propagation, so broadcast models, so 1546, for example, which you could use, and some of these, obviously, certain things like clutter settings, equally for things like the 1812 model. So we've got some default kind of options to check with in terms of clutter heights. So there's a couple there. Again, it depends on what type of whether it's a coverage or whether you're perhaps looking at a potential interference situation as well. So some of the other models might be more appropriate if you're looking at a different percentage of time for an interference situation. So the usual answer with this, there's more than one potential option, but certainly if have a look at one of the previous webinars, I think maybe Nick did, that's got quite a bit of scope for the different or the most common models in the tool, and what types of services that they're really applicable for.
That's lovely. Thanks, Paul. David, I hope that helps. If you haven't got access to those webinars, the previous webinar recordings, please do drop me an email and I'll let you have that. Same for anyone else. Thank you.
Okay, so where did we get to? That was propagation models, wasn't it? Yep. Okay, so just moving on to just some of the different sort of types of planning now. So point to multi-point, I've added some features into the prospective planning option. So this now allows you to take candidate locations with a height. We can also limit the area of interest to a polygon, and the max number of parented subscribers per base station has also been introduced. Okay, I'll just take you through and just show you that now within the tool. So I just got a little project here open. This was actually looking at connecting kind of street light furniture, telecells essentially to base stations, but it was looking at where would I want to place the base stations to give me the best locations to cover all of these telecells. So under the prospective planning menu, so this has been in the tool for a while, has allowed you really to based on kind of clutter types to say, excuse me, where would I place a site? So I can give it some site location potential details here. As I say, traditionally that's been on just clutter types. You can create clutter types, but they've put the ability now to say from an ASCII file. So from here, so I've got one that I've just called candidates. Got a input coordinate code for that. So what this is doing now is it's loading just from that ASCII file, and you can see here this was a potential. So again, most of the telecells that could be potential locations for base stations, and there was a few additional locations as well. So that now allows me, rather than saying from clutter areas, from these. So essentially, I can only place a base station where I have an XY position within this file at the specified height that I've imported there. The other feature that's been added, so you can add in the maximum number of subscribers per station. So rather than just purely, parenting on a best server field strength here, it's much easier now to be able to say, okay, well, the maximum I can have on any one station is, let's say, 400. And obviously I can then also specify, say, a maximum number of sites. Say I was looking at the maximum number of sites to deploy. So that will not then have, let's say, 10,000 subscribers that would be parented for, for a single station. It would go through, place the stations at the optimum positions, connect up as many of the subscribers as it could, up to, in this case, the 400, 4,000, whatever it may be, the limit for the type of planning, and then obviously repeat the exercise of going through and finding the next location to cover the base stations. The other one I mentioned is polygon limited. So if you have a polygon area of interest, all that does is, again, it's a limit in terms of the extent of the area and the calculation that's being undertaken. So if you've got a polygon that you want to use, then that's the place to check that. So I'm not going to run this function now, but essentially just this was the output. So you can see each one of these green stations that's been chosen by the tool based on the subscriber locations in order to cover the minimum number, really, I guess it's looking at to cover the station. So it's really trying to produce a plan that gives you a best position, particularly useful if you're starting out on a project. You maybe have no specific existing infrastructure in terms of locations that you must use, but you might have a series of candidate sites. So it allows you to take a candidate sites list based on a subscriber set. So in this case, as say, sort of lamppost locations, and where would I place those base stations in order to cover those, subject to max number of subscribers and a polygon if I'm using that. Okay, so that's, let's say, we used it recently, and those kind of changes have been in there. But for those that have used it, I think it should be quite useful. Those small additions, particularly that X, Y, and H position one, that really does save a lot of time, because it limits the positions that you can choose the stations, and it makes actually the calculation a lot quicker as well, if you're, rather than doing it to a general clutter area, which there's lots more points and therefore time involved.
Paul, just a very quick question. Can I use a shape file for the polygon to limit the area?
Yes, you can. So if you wanted to do that, I mean, I haven't got a vector one loaded here, but if you imported, say, a vector, so in this case, a polygon. So if I imported that into the tool, I could then use that, and that would become that polygon. So that would create into the vector file, and then you could check that box to say use polygon, and that would be the one that then it would use to limit it to, you know, a defined area within the calculation. So as long as you've got that shape file, import it into the tool, you can then use that as part of that calculation.
That's lovely. Thanks for that, Paul.
Okay, so that's point to multi-point. Point to point, there's been a few, again, there perhaps minor tweaks in a lot of cases, but the display profile display options, so there's a couple of extra bits now. Ellipsoid obstruction, so this talks about the percentage of the ellipsoid that's obstructed for the first Fresnel zone, and there's a gain relating to dish size. So essentially, when you have, say, your 3 or 4 dBs below what you're required for your availability target, 4 nines, for example, then it would say, okay, I might need 4 or 5 dBs in terms of additional gain required, and this is just going to make a suggestion in terms of the size of the dish related to that. Earth radius factor, so there's just a modification now with a calculator, and I'll show you that in a second. So that allows you just to, based on a K factor, determine the Earth radius. So again, particularly for point-to-point planning, most of the time you're probably using it as the median value for other types of network planning, but with the point-to-points, then looking at sort of minimum maximum Ks between a range, and just checking your profile is still meeting your availability targets is useful. So that's been included there. The point reflectivity gradient is DN1. The values have been modified. So this is this ITU 453 recommendation. And the RPE, for those that there's the file converter's been updated. So this is if you've got ADF format converters into the ADW format. So either on a single or on a batch mode basis. So that's been that's been updated version that's included, and that's just embedded within the application directory. So if you go in there and look for the RPE converter, then you'll find that in there. Okay, so I'm just going to show you just a couple of these within the tool. So firstly, for the profile screen, so let's just remove that coverage. So I've got a microwave link that I've just set up here on the left-hand side. Having a look in the list, and I'm just looking at the profile. Okay, so it's probably going to be quite difficult to see that. I have placed it on the slide just to, to make it a bit easier to see, but there's this obstructed, ellipsoid obstructed, so I'm just putting the sort of highlighter over that area there. You see, probably difficult to actually read the detail, but I've got an example on the slide that I showed there, and then this is the other bit here with being able to equate, the gain required to a size of an antenna, for example. Obviously, it could be other ways of achieving that, increasing the power, for example, but it gives you a suggestion there in terms of size that you're likely to need if you're looking to change antenna to achieve your required availability target. Okay, so that's that. Just looking at the propagation model screen I mentioned here, so the K factor, so we've got now the ability to, let's say, put 0.6 in as a K factor, work out what the effective Earth radius is, and then we can apply that automatically in there. So there were ways to do it before, but not automatically apply. You had to kind kind of copy paste, so it's a little bit easier to do that. And obviously you can save those as well within the parameter file, having done that for the network that you're looking at. Okay, so that's yeah, just a few changes in terms of the propagation and the point-to-point links. Okay, just broadcast. There's some new functions here and some improved. So SFN analysis as location probability map for the user-defined, or the ability to user-define C over I formula now within the tool, and also with user-defined looking at equalization intervals for EBU methods. So those two are kind of new options that have been added. In terms of signal types, then there's some additional ones here, DAB+, DRM+, that have been added. Those signal types help with things, configuring bandwidths automatically, but they're particularly useful when you're looking at interference situations. So looking at protection ratios that would be invoked. So you can start to use some of the inbuilt tables, having selected the relevant signal types here. So that's an advantage of using signal types rather than just using a generic signal type. For the input formats, then there's some new input formats that have been added. So you can see these three that have been added here. So sort of DAB, DVB types of station import, and with the GA1 contours, you can bring those in. So these are kind of allotment sub areas for the TDAB, DVB-T. So you can bring those into the tool now. So I'm just going to not going to cover any of the top ones. I'm just going to briefly show, just with conscious of time actually, that just those last three briefly on within the tool. So we have firstly the ability, just looking at the parameters. So signal type here, so you can see here all the different variety of types. So say if I select here the type, then it will essentially do the initial change you'll generally see is a bandwidth associated with that will change. But as I mentioned previously, the fact it knows this is a signal type, from this list, when you're then coming to look at an interference situation and the C over I, so what values is it going to use in terms of if you're co-channel, adjacent channel, etc., with equally with different types of services, then it will work out how much protection you would get. So 20, 30 dBs, whatever it may be for that frequency offset that you've got. In terms of importing, so on map station, so you can see here there's a number of bits that have been previously included, but these new ones here have added. So again, if you've got in these formats, then you can bring in, and that will be in a specific format. So it's expecting obviously details within the input data in specific locations. So if it's not in that format, then use the more general import method. But if it's a specific one, as we've got these three here, FM2, etc., then that will allow it to bring in all the relevant details from that input file. And lastly, while I'm here, just under the vector layer, I mentioned this GA1 contour, so you can bring that in again based on this ITU format. So file in that format, it will automatically then bring it in, and you can use that as a sub-allotment area. Okay, last bit then, just before we open up for a few questions, is just mesh networks. So there's been some improvements here as far as the parenting is concerned. So some optimization in terms of how the parenting and the speed that's done. And there's also an option now to have what's called the best server mode when you're connecting to the station. So rather than having just the first one it's connecting to, then you can choose the best server mode for connecting those subscribers. Okay, so let me just show you that. Okay, so what have I got here? Well, I've got a series of stations. So these are my kind of hubs or gateways. Then I've got a number of subscribers. These are the pink dots you can see here. So what I'm trying to do is actually connect up, ideally, by a direct connection, but in some cases that may not be possible. So if I can go via another subscriber, subject to a maximum number of hops that I put in, then I can get connectivity back into the network. So the subscribers now for the mesh is under a specific mesh menu, and we've got parenting of mesh. So this might be things like, say, IoT or other similar applications that you're looking to plan. We give it some input data, so the maximum elements per hub, the maximum hops, and the maximum distance. Okay, there's this best server mode that's now been added as well. So that will preferentially choose the best server that it can connect to, rather than just the first server that it would see above the threshold. Okay, just to mention that only orphan subscribers will be treated. So if they're not already orphans, or you want to leave some alone, then leave those with existing parents. But it will only treat the orphan subscribers within the list. Okay, I'm just going to set that off. So what it's going to do is just run through, look to connect up, say directly connect if it can to the stations. So you can see we've got 98% of those subscribers connected. What you'll see here is the colors. So the blue are the ones that are directly connected. The grays are those that are going via another subscriber. And then the pink ones are the ones that haven't been able to connect back into either directly to a base station or via an intermediate one. Just to perhaps make it a little bit easier, under the Object Properties menu under F5, then the subscriber area down here, we've got this mesh display now, which you can use. So that perhaps makes it a little bit easier to see where the connections are going to. So you can see each one of these blue ones is directly connecting. Let me just zoom in a little bit. And then I've got these gray subscribers. So those are where it's going via an intermediate hop somewhere. Okay, so that's under the F5 menu, but you just gives you an easy way of viewing which base station it's connected to, and or in the case of a subscriber, via an intermediate one, which one it's intermediary connecting to before coming back to the base station. So in the case here, we've got a subscriber here that's connecting to this other subscriber before it connects off to this base station here. Okay, so that's just to say a few features for the mesh parenting that have been added. Okay, so that's concludes the kind of presentation. We've had a few questions already. As I say, just to give really a flavour of some of the changes. There's been lots of other changes in the news and modification files. Really, the place to go to look for other bits of that will be of interest to you.